Hope everyone's doing well during these crazy times. And tonight we'll be talking about protein. And I'm going to do something a little bit different tonight. And what it is we're getting a little error here on YouTube. Let me see here. One moment. Let's try that one more time. It says it's working. Okay, let me check that out. Excuse me while I get this set up. Okay, it does. Okay, well, it says it's streaming. Hopefully it is. And we will get started. So tonight, we are going to be talking about protein. And one of the things that I would like to do, which is a little different tonight than other nights, is that I would like to make it as focused as possible. That's why of course, you could spend hours talking about protein, but I'm going to focus on what you need to know about how to make those choices of protein in your life, no matter what kind of lifestyle you have, whether it's vegan or not. We'll talk about both of those issues. And more importantly, we'll talk about how much protein you actually need. Because the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of competing dialogues going on right now. There are still paleo people out there who feel like that people do better with higher amounts of animal protein. Then that we have the keto audience who are now sort of understanding that there are some problems with going high protein and are focusing more on fat as opposed to protein. And one can look at it in a way that it seems as though different dietary trends, if we go back to, say, the Atkins era, when Dr. Atkins came out with the Atkins diet and people were very excited about that, people were excited because they could eat meat and cheese and butter and all these foods. And it turns out that, unfortunately, Dr. Atkins, of course, is historically a very important figure in the annals of dietary diets and such. Turns out that having high amounts of protein does have negative consequences. So the question falls on us to figure out, well, what is the proper amount of protein? And there are a lot of competing cultural things that are going on when it comes to understanding protein. When nations become wealthy, protein is seen as a status symbol. Being able to eat meat is considered a status symbol. And unfortunately, when cultural attitudes become very, very powerful and popular, they can sway the science in one way or another. And we're seeing that now when it comes to people sort of defending the idea of having a lot of protein in their diet. Now, there are reasons to increase protein. But as you'll see, by the end of this probably 30 minute, I'm going to try to condense the information tonight, probably 35 minute talk, is that you really don't need as much animal protein as you might think. There's lots of competing processes going on in the body. First of all, your gut actually recycles the lining of the walls of the gut and reuptakes that. That's probably 10 or 20 grams of protein just there. And believe it or not, plants have a decent amount of animal protein. A decent amount of protein. And we'll go through that. And when you look at it, when you're looking at the total amounts of protein that you need, you really don't need as much as you think. Now, there are certain circumstances where you do need increased protein, and we'll talk about that. So let me jump into my mind map one moment while I share my screen. Okay. All right, so you should see my screen. And you're used to seeing big mind maps, and this one will expand. But we're really going to break it down into amounts and something called IGF-1. And when you understand what IGF-1 is, which stands for insulin-like growth factor 1, it really gives you a good gauge into understanding why you don't need a lot of animal protein and what the positive and negative consequences are of this sort of idea of protein. So first of all, what is protein? Protein is basically made up of amino acids, and these amino acids are like links on a chain, and that is what a protein is. And protein is found in animals, of course, with different ratio of these amino acids. These individual links in the chain, one could say, there are different percentages of different types of amino acids that are found in animal foods and that are found in protein foods. For example, in animal foods, there's more of something called methionine. There's something called branched chain amino acids. We'll talk about all that. So the type of amino acids happen to be different when it comes to looking at animal protein versus plant protein. Both of these, there are a certain amount of amino acids that you need for your body for upkeep, because your body it needs protein to build itself up. So let's jump right into talking about the amounts that you need. And the RDA basically says that you need 0.8 grams per kilogram or 0.36 grams per pound. So if you have your cell phone out, this generally refers to lean muscle mass, but nonetheless, if you take out you probably have your cell phone handy. So open up your calculator and type in your weight and multiply that by 0.36. And you're going to get something in the range of, if you're 150 pounds, that's going to be, 54 grams of protein. And, so it's going to be somewhere between 50 and, 45 and 75, depending on what your weight is. Again, it's generally considered to be lean muscle mass, but nonetheless, for the purposes of tonight, just think about it from the perspective of your weight. And by the end of this, you'll understand how low that actually is when we go through some foods as an example. Now, many of you know that I am very influenced by Dr. Walter Longo. He's a longevity researcher at the University of Southern California. And he really looked at longevity as a factor for health. And when he looked at protein as an example, he actually came up with studies that showed that under the age of 65, 0.31 to 0.36 grams per pound of body weight was associated with the least risk of chronic health diseases like heart disease, obesity, a whole host of chronic health problems. So that's quite low. So it's similar to the RDA, basically. Now, remember your number now. Now, when we're talking about over 65, and when you get to be over 65, you do need increased animal protein. And the reason is because you don't really have the same kind of anabolic effect, building effect, when it comes to responding to, say, animal protein as an example. In other words, you need to be able to build muscle as you get older, because you need to be able to have once you lose your muscle mass, the increased risk of falling goes up, a whole host of chronic health problems increase, the ability to be independent can directly be associated with this muscle mass. And therefore, because you're not getting this building response in response to the protein, that means you need to have more animal protein after the age of 65. And basically what Dr. Longo's studies showed is that under 65, a lower protein intake was associated with low chronic diseases, but above 65, it wasn't. You needed to actually increase the amount of animal protein. And one study showed a 1.2 grams per day as opposed to 0.8 grams per day. So that is doesn't seem like a significant, but it's a somewhat significant increase. So that means that if you're over 65, I always tell people, then you don't have to be so concerned about maintaining the exact level. In fact, you just want to make sure you get enough of that. So as an example, if it's 1 gram per kilogram, right, then let's say you're 150 pounds. You divide that by 2.2, okay? And that would be the amount of protein that would be 1 gram per kilogram. So take your weight, and if you're over 65, and divide it by 2.2, and that's going to be 1 gram per kilogram. You'll see that the number is higher, of course. So that would be your number. So how much is 50 grams of protein? How much is 65 grams of protein? We'll get into that in just a moment. Now, if you talk to people in the paleo community, they're going to be saying that, oh, you can do a lot more. But quite frankly, as I said, I'm fairly persuaded by the studies that Dr. Walter Longo has done, especially the centenarian studies of people studying people who have lived, to 100, and to see what the situation is with them. And we'll get into IGF-1 a little bit later. So now you have that number in hand. And one thing to look at is protein density. So fish generally is less protein than chicken and beef, which might explain the reason why there might be a beneficial effect greater to fish than to chicken or beef. Obviously, there potentially is more cholesterol and more saturated fat and more potentially other toxins, depending on the amount, the source of the protein that you're getting. But as an example, 3 ounces of cod has 19 grams of protein, whereas for the same amount of chicken is 26 grams. And for beans is 6 to 8 grams. So as you can see, that there is going to be per serving lots of different amount of density when it comes to the amount of protein. So as an example, just so we know, like plants do have protein. So vegans who are eating lots of grains, beans, nuts, and seeds are never going to have protein deficiency. In fact, quite frankly, it's incredibly difficult. What did we say? We said 150. And we were using, just so we bring it up. So let's say we're looking for 50 grams of protein. As an example, let me close this here. My lunch this afternoon, let's do that. So I had a head of lettuce of romaine. So I know that's around 8 grams of protein. And I had 1.5 tablespoons of almond butter, which I made a creamy dressing out of. So that was probably around 4 grams of protein. I had 3 tablespoons of hemp seeds. That's whopping 10 grams of protein. And I had probably 2 tablespoons of black sesame seeds. That's probably 3 grams of protein. So as you can see, that's 25 grams of protein just in one salad, without adding any. If I added anchovies, let's say, which I didn't, but if I did, just one of those small tins probably has, not really sure, but more than you would think, maybe 12 grams of protein. Maybe someone can Google that real quick, but it's more than you might think. So as you can see, that would be, half, more than half of the protein for the entire day that you would basically need, which means if I wouldn't need all that much more. If I had a tin of, sardines or a can of tuna, that is going to basically which is probably 20 to 22 grams of protein, you're pretty much going to reach the amount of protein that you get. So the point is that if you're eating whole foods, you're really never going to have protein malnutrition. With the exception of the fact that as you get older, there is in addition to the fact that you're not getting an anabolic effect, the building effect that you need. In addition to that, you could be on medicines that reduce acid in your stomach that can inhibit the amount of protein that you're digesting. And as you get older, you also don't digest things as well as you did before, which means that even though you might be getting that amount, then you're not necessarily absorbing that amount because the enzymes may be not digesting properly. So that's another reason why you really need to make sure that as you get older, you are increasing the animal protein. Protein in general doesn't have to be animal protein. So nuts, beans, seeds, all of these are very high in protein. I've been a big fan of hemp seeds over the last couple of months after just realizing, my gosh, that just 3 tablespoons added to a salad, which adds a nice flavor, and it, certainly makes the salad better. And you're barely adding anything to it. 3 tablespoons is not that much, and you get 10 grams of protein. I've also been a fan of this product called Joy, J-O-I, just one ingredient, and it's basically blended almond and cashew butter. And you can actually dissolve it in water to make almond butter or cashew milk. But what I do is I use it in a salad. I put in a tablespoon or 2, and then I add rice vinegar and mix it up, and it becomes this really creamy, incredible dressing. My mouth is watering just thinking about it. You can make these creamy dressings that are loaded with, fiber and protein and good carbohydrates and fats that you need to add to your salad to be able to absorb all the amazing pigments that are in the various ingredients that you put in the salad. So something I've been a fan of lately. So when it comes to advising people over 65, if they are eating meat on a regular basis and it's not to the exclusion of still having plentiful amounts of leafy greens, nuts, seeds, beans, mushrooms, onions, garlic, if it's not to the exclusion of that, then I have no problem with it. But if you're under 65 and you want to optimize yourself to get to 65 without having chronic health problems, and to really, looking at the studies, ensure that you're going to have optimizing your body for longevity, and we'll discuss why that is in just a moment, then you want to make sure that you're keeping your protein level low. And there is a difference between your body's reaction to animal protein versus plant protein. We're going to get into that in just a moment. And remember, as vegans always like to say, a gorilla is a vegan and has no problem building muscle. They're just one big thing of muscle, and they're just eating leafy greens all day. So that's an argument they often say. Okay, so there are supplements, of course, out there. There are branched chain fatty acids, which some people use to help build muscle, and you'll find it in a lot of muscle building formulas. Some vegans, because these are found mostly in animal products, some vegans who are trying to build muscle will add branched chain amino acids. Bodybuilders often add branched chain amino acids to their workout routine. The research I don't see being all that, it does help with recovery, but I haven't seen much evidence to say that it's actually going to, build muscle more. Soy protein is very close to animal protein, and therefore is probably not a very good source of protein because of the negatives that can potentially be associated with soy protein. And in this case, I'm talking about soy protein supplements, soy protein processed foods like soy protein bun, so soy protein burgers and soy protein, fake chicken and all those soy protein, textured soy protein, all these, those sorts of processed proteins, soy proteins. But if you're having just a little tofu or fermented things like miso or some natto, it's not going to be an issue at all. Plant-based proteins, of course, pumpkin, hemp seed, pea protein, those sorts of protein supplements I have recommended and I happen to use myself. So I don't see much problem with using soy, other plant proteins like hemp. As I said, hemp seed, pumpkin seed protein is now out there, pea protein, etc. Whey protein is a very popular supplement. One reason that some people like it is because it's high in an amino acid, one of those links in the chains. And this cysteine is capable of helping create glutathione in the liver, which is like the body's master antioxidant. And there's something called N-acetylcysteine, which is a vitamin, and it's a form of cysteine, which is actually used for people who have Tylenol toxicity. Because when you, believe it or not, Tylenol is one of the most dangerous medications out there, and it's over the counter. In fact, most people who are familiar, intimately familiar with it, say that if it went before the FDA today, it would never be approved because it has a very narrow range of toxicity. And the reason because it has toxicity is because it depletes glutathione in the liver rapidly. And the difference between like one dose and the other completely depleting it and causing liver damage is very, very narrow. And so when people come in with severe liver damage, they're often given N-acetylcysteine to replenish the glutathione to help repair the liver. Anyway, people take whey protein as a supplement because it has cysteine, but also because it's a complete animal protein. It can be helpful with building muscle. And we'll get into the pluses or minuses of that when we talk about IGF-1. Just doing a time check here. Okay, so let's talk about IGF-1. Let me close these down. And IGF-1 stands for insulin-like growth factor. And the reason it's being included in this talk is because IGF-1, it goes up with protein. It also goes up because it's similar to insulin, also goes up with eating a lot of processed carbohydrates. But for the purposes of tonight, we're talking about how it goes up with IGF-1. Now, we need IGF-1 because it maintains our bodies, our muscle mass. The problem is that you want to get it just right. You want to have it in the middle. So when you look at studies that show problems, it's what's called the U-shaped curve, which basically means that at low levels, the number is high in terms of problems. And then as the level increases, it drops to a point where there's very few medical problems. And then the other side of the U, when it gets too high, and you get other particular problems. And we'll talk about what those are. But basically, it's an anabolic hormone. And we've all heard of anabolic steroids. Weightlifters who are taking anabolic steroids. That's not what this is. The word anabolic just means building. It just means that you're putting on something, building or multiplying. So it is capable of building things in your body. And so when IGF-1 is too high, it can promote growth of things. And therefore, you can get an increase in breast cancer, lung cancer. You'll see in colorectal, prostate, gynecologic cancers, you'll see that the cancer cells actually have high levels of IGF binding sites because the IGF is allowing, in fact, giving it sort of strength to be able to multiply. Insulin sensitivity can also be damaged with high levels of IGF-1, and it sort of makes sense because it is called insulin-like growth factor, so it behaves in a similar way to insulin. As you get older, it decreases with age. So what changes IGF-1? Well, fasting lowers it. So that's one thing. Insulin is going to raise it. So things that raise insulin, and the things that raise insulin also raise IGF-1. So dairy, sugar, animal protein, these sorts of things raise IGF-1. Now, when it comes to plant protein, we see something very interesting. So processed soy, in terms of plant protein, it's probably less risky, but it does raise IGF-1 because it's similar to animal protein. Now, animal protein definitely raises IGF-1 because of the presence of certain amino acids. Some people think it's methionine. Whatever the case is, animal protein by itself has this capability because of various links in the chain to be able to raise this IGF level 1 up. Therefore, animal protein is going to raise it up. Now, if you're a bodybuilder and you really want to build a lot of muscles, then having levels of high IGF-1 is probably going to be beneficial. Unfortunately, that's probably going to be associated with decrease in lifespan. And it is true that bodybuilders and muscle and linemen in the NFL have very poor life expectancy. So it doesn't mean that there are vegan bodybuilders out there, but a lot of them are they are supplementing for sure with different kinds of proteins. So you can build muscle. It is, and some people, vegan bodybuilders, let's just say it's easier to build huge muscles if you're eating a lot of animal protein because of the anabolic effect. So plant proteins, however, non-soy especially, like we discussed, like hemp, pumpkin, pea protein, these sorts of things, do not elevate IGF-1, which basically means that you probably are not going to have a problem if you're eating, a good amount of beans. Let's say you picked high protein vegetables or high protein plant products like beans, and obviously you don't want to have a whole diet full of beans for obvious reasons. You want to have a varied diet. The point is that if you're eating a wide variety of plant-based items, beans, greens, nuts, seeds, etc., you're never going to have an issue with protein. And two, you're almost certainly going to get enough protein. But the question is always that we have spoken about already. What about as you're getting older and you're over the age of 65? And the question is, should you check IGF-1 levels? Well, you don't necessarily have to. If you're not eating a huge amount of animal protein and you're having trouble with maintaining muscle mass, maybe it's a good idea. It's not a general check, a test that most people check. If you go in and you ask your primary care doctor to order you an IGF-1 level, they're probably not going to understand why you would even want to get an IGF-1 level. Now, I gave a lecture many weeks ago on the 7 blood tests that everyone should get. And one of those was insulin. And I am now checking IGF-1 as well. And the reason is because, remember, I spoke to you about that U-shaped curve. And it turns out that you want levels between 100 and 160, which is where you're going to have the lowest risk of being too low or being too high. With too high, we know it makes cancer grow easier because it's a growth hormone. Essentially, that's what it is. When it's too low, however, you're at an increased risk for dementia, cardiovascular disease, and sarcopenia. So here's another reason why, as you get older, it's very important to make sure that you're not going too low on the protein and that you're not going too high, but that the most likely situation as you get older, because levels go down, is to worry about being too low. And so therefore, for someone who is incredibly proactive about anti-aging and optimizing their health, I think it's incredibly important that you consider getting your IGF level 1, especially if you're dealing with this question of how much protein should I eat? Am I eating enough? Am I not eating enough? Someone like me, I am not a vegan, but I don't eat that much animal protein. And so for me, it's a good thing to make sure that I'm getting enough protein, and that my body is in a situation where it's in an ideal level. And I remind everyone that you can order this blood test on your own. You can go to a place. There are many labs now around the company. There are franchises. One's called Any Labs Now. Even Quest and LabCorp have services now where you can order your own lab tests. And I think that this is an amazing thing for people, because honestly, most doctors who are not really, they're focusing on treating chronic health diseases. So asking for an IGF level 1 won't make a lot of sense, because the usual standard conventional way, the reason that people would get this would be for maybe kids who are having growth hormone issues, because growth hormone and IGF-1 are tied together. So things like intense exercise can increase growth hormone, and therefore in a certain way safely raise IGF-1 levels if you need to do it. So obviously, as you're getting older, and you can't just think about protein. Obviously, you have to be doing strenuous exercise as you get older, or resistance training. You need to be working on your muscles as much as you possibly can, because they've shown that people who, when they look at various subgroups of people, those that are eating sort of a standard American diet, that they're omnivores, but they're eating a lot of processed foods, and they have the highest IGF-1 levels. For people who are eating very healthy, even if they are, mostly vegan, or, maybe they're an omnivore, but they only eat grass-fed, grass-finished beef, and they're not eating any processed carbohydrates. I mean, probably neither of these groups is going to have issues with IGF-1. But for people who are really focusing on that and they don't know, then getting an IGF level 1 is something that you can do. So that's really what I wanted to go over tonight. I think that I'm hoping that my example of lunch, that shows you that it's not difficult to get. If I were to have, a smoothie in the morning, and fruits have, Sheila, who's on the call today, sent me an email today that showing me that there are certain fruits I didn't even know, like guava has a decent amount of protein in it. But any plant that you use all plants have proteins in them. They also have a little bit of fat in them as well, even leafy greens, a small amount, but a little bit nonetheless. So I hope I'm going to end tonight's class a little bit short. I didn't think it would last more than around 35 minutes, and that's how long it lasted. If anyone has any questions, let me know. But I think the summary here, I would say, is that I think all of us now understand that there's a primary difference between how your body responds to animal protein and plant protein. If you're going to be eating animal protein, obviously you want it to be the highest quality animal protein, because when you eat animal protein, you're not just getting the protein, you're getting fat, and you're getting things like arachidonic acid, which could be inflammatory in some people. Obviously, saturated fats can interfere with several different things, or if you have a genetic susceptibility, that can certainly make things difficult for you health-wise. So there's things that go along with animal protein. But I chose IGF-1 because it's really the factor that we know that's associated with decreases in longevity, increases in cancer. And when you go online and you look at, the so-called anti-aging gurus and that sort of thing, there's often this dialogue between performance and longevity. And because they feel as though, well, IGF-1 at a higher level is going to increase your performance because it's going to allow you to maintain your muscle mass. But at the same time, if it goes too low, then you're optimizing yourself for longevity. And my answer to that is that you can have both. And that's why getting the level is important. So you can fall into that U, the bottom of the U, that is basically associated with the lowest amounts of chronic health disease as well as longevity, and you're still able through, especially if you're exercising, and doing and eating lots of polyphenols and lots of vegetables, then you're not going to have to worry about it. Are you going to be able to build huge muscles? Well, that may be a challenge. And for people who get their blood tests and it's under 90, let's say, then you can increase the amount of animal protein in your diet to get it up a little bit higher. And with that, you'll get obviously a decrease in your risk for the things that we spoke about, like dementia and cardiovascular disease and muscle wasting. And you'll be able to get the level up just a little bit, but not to a super high level, such that you'll be able to maintain muscle mass through exercise and ensure longevity. So it's really not a balance between performance and longevity. You can have both, but you need to be able to really figure out what's that natural amount of protein that you need. So that's tonight's episode. Next week, we'll be talking about some select micronutrients. And then for the next couple weeks, we're going to talk a little bit about various health strategies. So different types of implementation of different types of interventions, I guess you could say, that are sort of new, different lab tests that are out there now. We started several weeks ago with one called the micronutrient panel. And as you can tell, I'm a big fan of testing, and the fact that it's available to everyone now, I think is just great. An IGF-1 level is probably $50 to $60, if I had to guess, maybe $70. Sometimes it's combined with growth hormone, or sometimes it's combined with IL-6, which is an inflammatory marker that we spoke about in one of the anti-aging lectures. Big fan of that. And there are some amazing tests out there that show some incredible things that can really help you just dial in what you want to do to ensure optimal health and longevity, because I think that's what we all are looking for. So hope everyone enjoyed that. Thank you again for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you again. Have a great night.